Hello, and welcome to the Invisible Hand Show here on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Thank you, Mike Shanklin, for setting up the network so that we can take advantage of it for our show. Here's Larry. Hi, Larry.
Well, it took me a while again, as usual.
Hey, at least I got my speakers working this time.
This Voluntary Virtues Network has added control. Well, never mind. The offer on the screen went away. So, here we are. We have a show.
We do.
We've got a different background than usual.
I'm sitting in a different part of my room.
Okay, I'm sitting in the same part of my room.
Well, the part I usually sit in wouldn't make a very nice background today, so let's just leave it at that.
Someday we're going to have to work on the lighting at my end.
Yeah,
Anyway,
well, the light coming behind you gives you somewhat of a otherworldly look.
well, perhaps that's for the best then. But today is an auspicious day because, after all, tomorrow is the 4th of July. We get to celebrate.
Yeah, I'm wearing my 4th of July. Oh, you can't see the red part. Here. Red, white, and blue.
There you go. Way to be patriotic.
Yeah, that's about as patriotic as I get, a red, white, and blue tie-dye.
Well, at least this can give us a theme for tonight's show. We can talk about the American Revolution, what led up to it, and how and why it happened. So perhaps we could begin by setting the scene. In the colonies, there were a large number of people there for the time. After all, the Native Americans who had occupied the continent were rather sparsely settled, living by hunting and gathering as they did. The Europeans who arrived brought a farming. Whoops, you disappeared. Am I gone?
No, I just wanted to take a drink of my soda without being on camera.
Okay, that's fine. We'll figure these things out eventually. But the Europeans who arrived brought a farming culture, an agricultural culture. So, of course, one of the first things they did was cut down a bunch of trees, dig up the land, plant crops, and they brought in their domestic animals, the horse being a very notable example. But a lot of the people who arrived in the New World didn't arrive there voluntarily. Those were the African slaves. Hey, you're back. The slaves, of course, were brought against their will, and the lucky ones, relatively lucky ones, were the ones who were brought to North America in the English colonies, because the living conditions there, at least, were not such as to cause them to die within a few years. If they'd been taken to the islands or South America, the chances are very good that they would have lasted only a few years at most before they would have died. Times being tough there, and the environment not being one conducive to human continued existence. But be that as it may, in North America, there were also indentured servants. People did want to escape from Europe, notably various parts of England, or the judge in England sentenced them to be sent to the what became the United States, in particular Georgia, so that the many thousands of people arrived in chains, literally or figuratively, and of course there were indentured servants. So a lot of people living on the North American continent who were from England or from various other parts of Europe were there under duress. They didn't exactly have freedom. As time went by, the economies in the colonies prospered. They attracted more people, or one way or another. They built up their farms. They got local economies going. They no longer had to trade with England in order to survive. They didn't depend on the ship arriving with food or medicine and so forth. They were able to produce their own. In fact, they produced quite a lot of things which England and other European nations desired. So they established trade. They had cod fisheries, for example, and they had tremendous amounts of timber. They were able to build ships to send back to England. Now, time passed, and France, which had what was then French provinces in what is now Canada, and the interior portions of the United States, what became the United States, that is the Mississippi Valley, was a great competitor with England. So, of course, they had one of their periodic wars. Now, this particular war ended, if I recall correctly, in 1763. What in the in the colonies was called the French and Indian War. I'm not sure what the French called it, but the English managed to win that war. But it was expensive. For some reason, wars tend to cost a lot of money. And of course, the people of England, the taxpayers of England, did not want to have to pay all that money to guard, in their eyes, their colonies in the New World. They wanted the colonists to pay for it. After all, the colonists were the ones being protected from the French. We didn't want those nasty French coming in and taking over the lands that we had claimed for ourselves, they said. The English Parliament, therefore, came up with what was called the Stamp Act. That is, they said, if you purchase something which is on a piece of paper, the paper has to have the stamp indicating that you have paid your taxes on that paper. Well, you can just imagine, if you're a lawyer, you deal with paper all day, printed paper, you have to pay all these taxes. If you're a shipping agent and you are shipping goods back and forth with England, well, you have bill of lading. That's printed on paper. You have to have pay a tax. Even playing cards, well, they're printed, and therefore you have to pay a tax. For some reason, they didn't like to pay this tax. They didn't want the English to recoup all the money they had been spending in quartering troops in the United States, in the colonies, and therefore they objected. Now, let's examine who it was that was objecting. Well, the slaves didn't care much one way or another, and the slaves constituted perhaps 1/5 of the population of the colonies at the time. Women were not allowed to own money. Well, they could go to market with carrying money, of course, but they were carrying their husband or their father's or their brother's or their nephew's money, not their own money. There were the indentured servants. They didn't have anything to do with printed paper. They just worked, in most cases, on the farm. In fact, you take your average farmer, and well over 95% of the population were working on farms in one way or another. Obviously, the slaves were overwhelmingly in agriculture, as were the indentured servants. But the typical prosperous independent family lived on a farm and worked on a farm and were farmers. So because these farmers conduct their operations without printed paper, they didn't need to pay much taxes. So the people who were really being pinched, who were actually affected by these stamp acts, were a tiny minority of the population of the colonies. But those people happened to be the ones who were best off, who had the most wealth, who had the most assets. And of course, they were the ones who had the most to do with the political situation in the colonies. They were the ones who ran the state governments. They were the ones who, shall we say, influenced what was done when the legislatures met in the colonies and formed the laws for the various states. So we're talking here, therefore, about the people who ran the revolution, who got started on a revolution, who instigated the revolution, the people who spread word among their neighbors that, oh, it's a terrible thing. So since these were the influential people, the people who were able to communicate with Parliament, with people in the government of England, they objected strongly. And England, being nice guys, as we all know, said, okay, you don't want to pay for all this paper. We will therefore rescind and get rid of the Stamp Act. Well, the people of England still had these debts. How are we going to pay for this? The taxpayers of England didn't want those freeloaders in the colonies to get away without supporting themselves. I mean, after all, it's expensive to have station troops out in the forest of the wilds of North America, keep away the French. And because it's expensive, that meant that somebody was going to have to pay for it. And then you got all these freeloaders, these people who weren't paying their own way, people who thought that someone else should be taking care of them and be providing all the money. By an odd coincidence, the Parliament had similar feelings, and they passed acts which had to do with tea. They said that the English merchants sold tea in the to the colonies were able to do so without having to pay tax. So that this particular I've forgotten the name of the company, but it was an English company, one of the famous name which you'd recognize if I could remember it. Say it. This particular company sent a shipload of tea to Boston to sell the tea. Now this
was it the British West Indies Company or something like that?
There you go. That's it. They arrived. The ship arrived in Boston, and they had all this tea, which could be sold for less because it didn't have to pay a tax than the other sources of tea. You'd have thought that the economists would have been delighted at the prospect. But there was a problem, you see. If England could give that advantage to one company, they can give it to others, and they can take it away. And the colonists didn't like this because this was something which could be used against them. Therefore, a bunch of the boys got together and went down to the ship that was sitting in the harbor, having been refused admission by the colonists, and threw all the tea overboard. Now, let's say that you are a merchant, an official of the tea company. You're not going to like that. In fact, you're going to look upon that as a riot. You're going to look upon that as destruction of private property. They had no right to go on board that ship and destroy that tea. So you would have expected the officials in Massachusetts Bay Colony to have arrested as many of these people as they could find and to punish them, at least by fines, which would have recouped the losses for the company. But the government of the Massachusetts Bay Colony did nothing. They ignored it. They laughed it off. And this is outrageous. How would we feel in the United States if the state of Texas said, all right, there was this riot, they attacked federal property, they attacked the property of a corporation that has offices in Texas. They destroyed them, they did all this. And the local police, the local courts, the local state officials did nothing about it. They simply ignored it, laughed it off, said, boys will be boys. That'd be outrageous. That'd be an attack on the very fundamentals of decency. Wouldn't you feel that way? Of course you would. And therefore, the Parliament wanted to punish those Massachusetts officials. Now, as we all know, you can punish officials by punishing the people that they're responsible for. For example, we can punish the people of Iraq, the rulers of Iraq back in the days of Saddam Hussein, by cutting off medical supplies that are used to keep the people of Iraq alive. And we can punish the people of Cuba for their temerity in having a ruler we don't like, Fidel Castro, by cutting off trade with them. So this has a noble tradition going way back.
It doesn't seem like a very effective strategy.
Well, by an odd coincidence, it didn't work. It didn't work in the United States because it provoked a revolution, and it didn't work in Iraq, and it didn't work. Well, let's put it this way. To my knowledge, it has never worked anywhere in the world, even though it has been applied many times. So this is another instance of it's not working. For some reason, the people of Massachusetts got grumpy. They said, these are punitive laws. We don't like them. You're going to do all these sorts of things to us. But again, this is an argument over money. People of Massachusetts and their other colonies were trying to defend their money, their assets, their wealth. The people of England were trying to defend their money, their assets, and their wealth. Now, you may have noticed, if you've been a regular listener to these presentations, that one of the characteristics of any physical object money, that is, any money that has ever existed in history, is that it's a zero-sum game simulation. That is, if what one person gains, another person has to lose. Therefore, we're in a situation in which the colonists and the Parliament were in a zero-sum game situation. The way they looked at it. If the colonists didn't pay the tax, someone else, didn't pay for this military, someone else had to. And the other party, in this case, was the English government, which would have to take the money from their government, from their population, and the people of England didn't want to pay that tax either. It made them opponents, rivals, enemies, or in this particular instance, it sparked a war. Therefore, here we have the colonists fighting not for the things that they talk about in your history books. They were fighting over money and who would have to pay taxes. They were not fighting in order to, well, let's look at the list of some of the things. We have religion. They were not fighting for freedom of religion. They didn't have freedom of religion in the colonies before the war, and they didn't have freedom of religion after the war. Oh yes, if you wanted to practice a Protestant mainline denomination, no problem. But if you wanted to be Catholic, you couldn't vote. You were not allowed to vote. If you wanted to be a Jew, or if your mother was a Jew, then you couldn't vote because you were not a Protestant. If you wanted to be atheist or agnostic, again, you couldn't vote. And as far as I know, you would, even today, find it extremely difficult to be elected to almost anything if you claim to be atheist or agnostic. Freedom of speech. Well, you were free to speak as you liked out on the frontier, all by yourself in the woods, talking to the bears and the trees and the birds. But for some reason, that wasn't the case in town. If you were an unpopular speaker, you might very well be arrested for sedition or for some other improper speech, shall we say.
Well, if it was really bad, you might just get tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail.
Yes, but that wouldn't have been the law doing it to you. The law did find out various ways to punish those who didn't speak, who said things that were not considered to be appropriate. And then we're not talking here about yelling fire in a crowded theater. If, for example, you were to assert that slavery in Virginia was something which should be abolished, you would not be very popular, and ways would be found within the law to make sure you didn't say such things. And of course, there's freedom of the press. I mean, who was it that had presses? Benjamin Franklin had some presses and newspapers, and a few other people did. But the overwhelming majority of the people in the colonies, having the government say, you can't say that, which the Continental Congress did from time to time after the Revolution, they didn't care. They didn't have a press to be free. The right to assemble. Well, they had just as much right to assemble before the Revolution as they did after the Revolution. The right to petition for redress of grievances. They had that right before the Revolution. Free of unreasonable search and seizures. Well, again, they had that with the colony, the colonial governments. So they weren't getting that. Due process, fair trial with counsel, freedom from cruel and unusual punishments. All of these things already existed. The revolution wasn't in order to gain these things. To the degree which they existed before the revolution, they existed after the revolution. To the degree they were suppressed before the revolution, they were suppressed after the revolution. So the revolution wasn't for any of these things. If we look at the Declaration of Independence, the preamble to which is one of the most inspiring and noble things I can recall ever reading. Ideals which I heartily and strongly approve of. But the colonists didn't. People who wrote that document, the committee that put it together under the inspired pen of Thomas Jefferson, did not believe in that preamble. They were not for rights to life. They had capital punishment, and if a slave tried to escape or was beaten to death, well, okay, the guy lost that much of an asset, but it wasn't illegal. The right to liberty. Well, who had liberty? Did the slaves have liberty? No. Did women have liberty? No. Did indentured servants have liberty? Not so as you can tell. And then, of course, we've got to come to the question of who was allowed to vote. You could vote if you had the following characteristics. You were white, that is, you were not a Native American or an African in descent. If you were Protestant, if you were male, if you were a freeholder. Now, a freeholder is someone who owns at least so much money in real estate. That is, own real estate of at least a minimum value, say $50. Now, Benjamin Franklin moves to Philadelphia as a young man. He sets up in business. He wasn't allowed to vote. He wasn't a freeholder. And of course, this meant that maybe someplace between 10 and 20% of the adult population could vote. The rest couldn't. Now, where's the liberty there? Here you are talking about taxation without representation. You can't vote, yet you're being taxed. You're having laws imposed on you. And this is true after the revolution as well as before the revolution. Again, these patriots, who the English thought of as freeloaders, they thought of as people who wouldn't pay their own way, who wouldn't be responsible for themselves. These people were not trying to establish liberty and freedom for all. They were not trying to create these things because they didn't exist before and they didn't exist after. What they were trying to do was improve their own personal economic situations. Now, would the revolution have been any different had they been out to create freedom? I don't think so. Because the people who would have been supportive of fighting for freedom were not the people who had the money to run the revolution. If the revolution had taken place under the banner, freedom for all, or let every adult vote, I mean, the people would have said, well, of course, you can't possibly mean letting women vote. You can't possibly mean letting blacks vote. Maybe we'll let the Catholics vote, but look at what the Pope did, and look at how the Catholics have been. No, we can't really have that. And you certainly wouldn't want to let people who vote who are not Christians. So there would have been almost no support for a revolution if they had actually put into effect what they claimed to be the motives for the revolution. If they had actually tried to establish liberty, if they had actually tried to do the things which the ideals they were espousing would suggest, there would have been no support. There would have been, if you'd gone around advocating that, they would have laughed at you. So we see that money not only provided the motive for the revolution, but money was the basis on which the people opposed the very ideals of the revolution they supposedly supported. And of course, only about a third of the population took any active part in supporting the revolution. Another third took another third of the population took some actions opposing the revolution, and the other third just tried to keep their heads down. Oh, actually, I'm mistaken. There were a few who actually did fight to get liberty, but those slaves who joined the British didn't succeed. They remained slaves, even though they joined the British side. The British didn't see fit to free them either. So the Revolutionary War in the United States was a revolution. It did create a set of ideals which are extremely valuable, are extremely important, are things which we all should be supporting to my life. But the people of the day and time, our founding fathers, the people who made it possible for us to have the freedoms we enjoy today, they didn't do that on purpose. They weren't trying to give blacks the right to vote. They were not trying to free the slaves. They were not trying to let women control their own destiny. They were not trying to let Jews and Catholics participate in decision making by the politicians. They really didn't mean it. That was an accident. That was inadvertent.
Well, honestly, I don't think any of the wars that exist are probably sold to the people by telling the truth, or the people would never support the wars. So.
I think it was Winston Churchill who became noted for saying the first casualty of war is truth. So truth and war simply don't go together, and that holds true for the American Revolution as well as all the other wars I know of. Let's put it this way. War is one of the little insanities which money forces upon us. War is absolutely insane. War goes around destroying people and property. I don't know of any war that hasn't caused a sacrifice by the participants.
The only people who like war are the people who are making money from war.
But it reduces their own wealth in the long run. Think of all the tax money they have to pay or that have confiscated from them in order to support the war. Think of all the people, think of how much richer the economy would be for everybody. How much more goods and services and people and labor would have been available without the war. So all we can say about war is that war is insane. It is madness, and it is induced madness brought about by the nature of our money. That's all there is to it. A physical object, money, is going to be associated with war because it makes people enemies.
And people will lie, cheat, steal, and kill to get it.
So far, history has shown us that people will lie, cheat, steal, they will do anything they can think of to get money. And if you don't think of it, your neighbor will.
Well, we've only got about 2 more minutes left to wrap up, so is there any final words you wanted to add?
Yes, if you're going to use fireworks, be really, really careful, because the fireworks are things which, again, are made for money, even though they can harm you, even though they can give you serious physical injuries, even though the manufacture of fireworks is quite dangerous, even though the storage of fireworks is quite dangerous. Be careful. It's very fun to celebrate, but it's better to use sunblock and swim in a pool someplace than to use
Wise words. Wise words.
And of course, I hope we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining me, and I'm Glider-Shelley, which I forgot to mention at the beginning, and the speaker, Larry Mason, is the author of Invisible Hand, which I usually show, but I was in a rush tonight and I didn't get it in frame, so.
That's okay. If they know the name of the book and the name of the author, they can Google it.
Yeah, I think anybody who's checking out these videos is pretty clear on what we're promoting, or where to find the information at least.
Right.
Well, I guess I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Unless you have babysitting next weekend.
I don't expect to.
Alrighty then. So next week. See you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.